So, welcome to Scotland's Choice. Let's find out who we've got on the podcast today.
My name is Olaf Stando. I am in Burnt Island. I'm a council candidate for Ward 9 on Fife Council, Burnt Island, Kinghorn and West Kirkcaldy. I live here, but I work in Edinburgh at the Scottish National Party headquarters as a digital media officer. I've been an active front defence campaigner since about 2013. I'm active in anti-austerity movements. I've been helping out Ukrainian refugees as well, and I'm active in a community radio in Kirkcaldy. That's basically that about me.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Knox. I'm up here in the beautiful Highlands of Scotland, or the Bahamas of the North, as I like to call it. I've been a councillor for 5 years, and I can honestly say being a councillor is one of the best things I've ever done. I'm standing for re-election in the ward of Ayrton Loch Ness, so Ness is one of my constituents. I'm a lawyer by trade. I spent 19 years as a prosecutor at various roles in the Fiscal Service, including Head of Victims Policy in Crown Office, and latterly the District Procurator Fiscal and Inverness. I currently work for Chest Heart Stroke Scotland, supporting people with chest heart stroke and long COVID conditions to get their lives back, sort of like I did. I had a serious car accident, caused a change in direction so that I did not to be alone anymore. I was going to go out there and help people, work for the third sector, and stand for election. And I've never looked back. I'm loving it.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Melville. I'm coming to you live from sunny Montefieth, which is Angus's premier East Coast town, in my opinion. I'm the candidate for Ward 4 on Angus Council, which is Montefieth and Sidlaw. I'm the current national convener of SNP Students. I'm a former customer services manager in a major business, and I'm looking to bring energy and ideas to Angus Council to deliver real change for everybody who lives here.
Well, welcome to Scotland's Choice, all of you. It's fantastic to have you here today. We've just heard from Olaf there last. Let's come to you first to ask you this question. What initially got you into politics, and how did you become part of the independence movement?
So I was actually always into politics. When I was sort of 9 or 10 years old, I used to come to my grandparents' house at weekends, and the most exciting part of it was reading newspapers and magazines that they've always had subscriptions to. I always used to be a bit of a nerd, but I grew up in Poland. I was born in Poland, and I came to Scotland when I was 11. And I suppose the experience of being a migrant and of sort of integrating into Scotland and feeling very welcomed as part of a wave of EU migrants in 2004. Obviously, EU enlargement, that's when Poland and the other countries joined. Lots of other people came to Scotland at the same time. And I suppose the contrast as well of growing up in Poland in relative comfort and then living in relative poverty in Scotland after coming here, sort of starting from scratch, living in a council estate for a couple of years, and just the experience really of poverty, of we still had a new Labour government at that point, but have lived through austerity under David Cameron and many Tory governments. Have known a lot of people that had to use food banks and so on, and it's been a very acute impact. So I suppose that was part of the path in which I got involved in politics. And the way in which I got involved in the independence movement was about 2013, 2014, when the referendum was coming up. I never really saw myself as a nationalist in terms of sort of flag waving or in terms of a Braveheart sort of identity. I've lived in England as well a couple of years before coming back to uni in Aberdeen. So I see myself as very much of a kind of Polish Scot with an English connection as well. So it's not about nationalism, but it's about building a better country that's free from austerity, that's more equal, that's more prosperous. That's a bit like Ireland or Denmark or Finland, countries that have not the same amount of resources that Scotland does, but they thrive anyway. So it's that ambition and wanting to achieve more for Scotland, and it's all coming from sort of experience of living under austerity.
Well, thanks for that, Olaf. And the eagle-eared amongst you will realise that I meant to come to Lloyd there, but it was fantastic to hear from you. Lloyd, tell us what got you into politics and your part in becoming part of the independence movement.
Sure. So like a lot of people, I come at this from a different angle in that in 2014, I supported no. Please don't crucify me. And
Nobody
it
will.
wasn't until Brexit really that it became apparent to me that the UK doesn't work for Scotland. Looking, I was 15 years old when the Brexit result came through, and looking at the map, it just was so clear to me that Scotland is so ill served by the Westminster system. And that's what really got me into politics. And I started doing a bit more research. I joined the SNP on my 16th birthday, and I haven't looked back since. And for me, independence, like Olaf, is about making the most of the massive resources and talent that we have in Scotland to build a fairer society that we can't do with the current limited powers and current political direction of the UK. So that's where I am. That's what got me into politics. And I also don't see myself as a nationalist. I'm more of an internationalist, wanting to reconnect Scotland to the world and play our part in tackling things like climate change and global poverty.
Isn't that the striking difference between people who are campaigning for independence for Scotland to be part of the world, to be part of the EU and other international mechanisms where we're now welded to a UK which is becoming Little Britain ever more every day, isn't it? And Emma, just same question to you. Obviously you've kind of covered quite a lot of that in your intro about the fact you had a major change and you decided to get into politics and put something back. What was it that drew you to the independence movement, though?
Well, I suppose I've always been part of it. Well, it feels like I've always been part of the independence movement. A wee bit like Olaf and his grandmother. And my family got me into politics at a really early age. By the way, nerdy is good, Olaf. I consider myself to be a nerd and I'm proud. I'm showing my age, I suppose, but and I remember leafleting with my dad for Winnie Ewing. Must have been 1979 when she stood for Murray and Nairn. So I've done my legwork, that's for sure. I really honestly don't remember ever not wanting Scotland to be an independent nation. It always seemed to be a natural and normal thing to want.
So before we kick off on the questions I want to ask you today, how's everybody's campaign going? You're all running at the moment. How's it all going?
Well, I'll kick off. It's brilliant, but it's tiring. I'm not going to lie.
Well, you've covered a lot of ground. We've seen your posts on social media.
I'm trying everything. I'm doing a bit on the tricycle, a bit on my feet, and a bit in the electric car. And my husband, we've got a tandem, and I've even managed to persuade Dave to come out in Stoke for me, so we're both out.
For anybody who doesn't know, Emma's ward, she's a sitting councillor going for re-election, is the same size as Luxembourg.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm going to be fit as a fiddle by the end of this. But I did forget how much I really love getting out and about, to be honest. I'm really enjoying it. People are a wee bit more reticent to speak for as long now, but I think that's maybe COVID. So people will come to the door and give you a big cheery smile and a thumbs up, or sometimes a thumbs down, but not very often. But yeah, loving it. It's going really well.
Is that your experience, Lloyd, just now, that people waving at you? Everybody also always says a great reception on the doorstep. I think that goes with every political party. But what's it actually like for you just now?
I haven't had as much waving. Maybe I'm just not as friendly looking as Emma. But it's going really well. Like Emma, I love campaigning. I absolutely love it. It's amazing. Gets the steps up, and it's all for the cause. But our campaign's very well underway. The response I've had from the folk I've been chatting to so far has been really, really good. Both myself and the sitting councillor Beth Whiteside, who's our SNP group leader in Angus, we're working really, really hard to both get elected, and we're also very hopeful. So things are going very well.
And Olaf, for you?
Oh, it's going pretty good. We're off to a pretty strong start. I think we've covered around a third of our leaflet from a third of our ward leaflets already. We've been pounding the doors pretty much every single day until sunset. I'll let you into a secret. It's not always sunny in Burton Island, so we had a couple of snowstorms recently, and we kept on going anyway. Didn't have as many waves either. I think people maybe are a bit more reluctant to speak and have full-throat conversations, but we had a couple of street stalls as well, and we had some really productive conversations as well, some in-depth conversations about, local issues that have really been sort of bubbling up in town. So in Burton Island, we might talk about that later. We have a harbour that's been fenced off by a port operator that's very controversial at the moment. We've got issues with housing that need to be fixed. We have a lot of local issues that are particular to the town, but also across Scotland. It's been going very well. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for what the SNP has done across Scotland. I think people feel that with the cost of living fighting. People have been mentioning the stuff like Scottish Child Payment, for example, rising to £20 a week today.
These things really cut through to families and their
I
homes,
think
don't they?
there's a contrast between
yeah.
sort of Tory austerity and Rishi Sunak's smoke and mirrors.
Well, especially, getting these benefits from the Scottish Government at a time when they can see, usually, because we're talking about an awful lot of people, including a lot of working people, seeing their universal credit payments cut as well. It's quite noticeable, isn't it?
Well, it's noticeable, but it's callous and it's shameless in the best ways that Tories went there and cut universal credit at a time when the cost of living is the highest it's been for decades, at a time when Brexit is still high, hitting families and businesses. It's just callous. And I think people are seeing through this. And if you take Partygate into this as well, and the sort of contempt with which Boris Johnson has treated the rest of us, I think a message of hope and optimism and constructive politics that are not tribal, I think that resonates across five.
It certainly does. And you were mentioning Partygate there, and it's something that's just happened a little bit before we've recorded this episode here, was on the day that fines were issued for people who were breaking the rules at Downing Street. The Tory MPs all went across the street for a champagne party. I mean, those kinds of things, people do notice that. And I think it does play out when people are thinking about how they're going to vote. Let's talk about local democracy. And perhaps this time we'll start with you, Olaf. We know that 18 councillors in Scotland in local authority elections have already been elected effectively because the wards that they're standing in weren't contested. And there's no doubt that, if you put yourself forward for council, which we'll talk about in a wee minute or two, when you put it forward, you're intending to do a good job there. So there's no disrespect to those people who have been automatically elected in uncontested wards. But it's not great for local democracy, is it? I mean, we all know that our communities have got lots of people in them who make extraordinary efforts to give up their time, to advocate out and help out in the community. Why do you feel that so few people want to put themselves forward as candidates to be councillors?
Well, firstly, big congratulations to the candidates that get elected. It doesn't matter that they were uncontested; they're still going to be serving their communities and working hard, and they deserve credit for standing. It's not easy putting yourself forward. I think councils a lot of the time get overlooked in terms of what they do. Councils get a lot of the blame, but not as much attention. And it's not really about attention. It's just about the fact that a lot of the time people don't know exactly what the councils are responsible for. The amount of powers in councils could also be increased, and there's a bit of a disconnect often between communities and councillors. People don't really know what exactly they do. Why do not enough people put themselves forward? I think there's clearly barriers to inclusion. There are gender barriers, race barriers, class barriers. I think in terms of the class barriers particularly, councillors only get paid about £18,000. Now, I'm not advocating that councillors get paid extortionate amounts of money, but I think a national living wage at least would be reasonable, given that councillors were key workers during the pandemic, delivering a lot of the key services. We've actually had an SNP conference motion about this that passed overwhelmingly at the last conference, calling for councillors to be paid a proper living wage. Look, it's not about living a lavish lifestyle, but it's about attracting people from across the board, attracting more working class candidates. At the moment, the council salary is just not quite enough to live on if you want to treat it as a full-time job. And it should be a full-time job because I mean, there are councillors that treat it as a sort of side hustle. A lot of Tory MSPs, for example, are councillors as well, SNP MSPs as well, actually. And at the moment, it's seen as that. I think another barrier as well is just the lack of understanding what councillors really do. I think it's important to promote the work of councillors, to make councillors a bit more easily accessible. We could have more kind of public forums, open democracy, and that's certainly something that we want to promote in Fife. But there's lots of barriers to access in politics.
Yeah, but before I ask the same question of you, Emma, I just have to recall when I was a councillor, I remember setting off really early in the morning to go to a meeting, which was, a good distance away, and I was driving in my own car, on an early morning trip when I was listening to the radio and somebody complaining about councillors being chauffeured around in limousines And I thought, where are these councillors that are chauffeured around in limousines? You talked about the pay there for councillors, and I think there's sometimes a public misconception about councillors' pay. It's not a lot of money. This is basically, I think it's around about the living wage, if I'm correct, just now, and not a lot more. And when it comes to expenses, your expenses are just for your costs, your mileage, and some other bits and pieces in there. But there's not this kind of lavish lifestyle that people think councillors have. But Emma, we're talking about the difficulty of getting people into standing for council. Why do you think not more people would put themselves forward?
I'm afraid to sound like we're only interested in money, but I totally agree with Olaf. I think the salary does put people off. Olaf's mentioned that it works out at less than the minimum wage. But if you look at the spectrum of people that are councillors, that demonstrates that the salary is putting people off. They tend to be retired, independently wealthy, or like me, have amazingly supportive partners, or have to work a second job. If we want more diversity and a better pool of people on the council, I think we have to pay it realistically, to be honest. And the workload is quite considerable. We all know that around the table. I think a lot of people think we are supported by an office. I still get calls from people asking if I'm the office manager, or even worse, if I'm the PA. And my husband gets some of those calls now, so that's slightly better. But we are on our own. We do this all unsupported. So
it's a really important point. There isn't that support mechanism that's around other elected representatives that you get. When you're a councillor, you're doing it all yourself. You're going to, in your ward, which you'll excuse me, Olaf and Lloyd, because I used to represent the same ward. I know there's something like about 12 community councils, 13 your parent councils, and Emma will be going out to these time and time again, pretty much every night of the week, driving enormous distances in bad weather and so forth. So it can be quite difficult. But I think one thing that comes through from you, Emma, and the reason you're putting yourself up again, is that it can also be really rewarding. But let's come to Lloyd on that same subject.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Emma and Olaf have said. I think the level of wage that you get does put people off. I mean, we can see that in Angus, most of the administration are older men who also happen to be sort of near the retirement age or independently wealthy as well. But I also think that councils and councillors can often seem like a bit of an afterthought in terms of where priorities lie in terms of political parties, and that goes right across the spectrum. Despite the fact that councils make lots of the really, really crucial decisions to people's lives, a lot of the emphasis, quite rightly in some respects, is paid to Holyrood and Westminster, whereas, it's councils who are really on the sort of front line of delivering a lot of the stuff that is actually decided by these places. So I feel like part of it is the money side of it, and another part of it is access, as Olaf and Emma have said. But there's also an attitude issue that councils are not treated as really as important as they should be, because they do deliver a lot of the stuff that actually, a lot of the policies that get made in Holyrood are delivered through council chambers. So I feel like we need to, as folks that live in Scotland, political parties across the spectrum need to really focus on councils as a valid and important forum for getting people in to make these decisions.
And I think that's a really important point about the responsibilities of councils and councillors, because as an MP, I get lots of emails and things saying that I should do something or I should get something done. And often I have to reply, well, yeah, I'll speak to your councillor, because that's actually a council. People don't understand lots of things about roads and social care and all of those kinds of things, housing and so forth, actually come under the remit of councillors and the councils. And there's a lot to that. There's an awful lot to that. And we know that in other independent countries of a similar size to Scotland and smaller, there are many more councillors per head of population than there is at the moment across the nations of the UK. So you've not only got this twin factor of, there is a status issue, there's a reward issue, as you pointed out, in terms of, it's not even reward, it's a livability issue with it. But there's also the issue that there isn't the kind of recognition of the responsibilities that's there, and that's something hopefully in this podcast we can do a wee bit to take forward. I always feel that when I talk about gender gaps in politics, it's probably the worst person is somebody who's representative probably of the majority of kind of white middle-aged men in politics saying this, but I won't stop doing it. There is obviously a need to increase gender equality. The World Economic Forum Gender Gap Report estimates that it'll actually take about 145 years to attain gender parity in politics. And women only represent about 26% of about 3,500 parliamentary seats worldwide. And I'm sure these figures must be even higher for underrepresented groups. How do we tackle the issue of underrepresentation at a local level? If I start with you, Lloyd.
Yeah, I think we've all got to pitch in as society and political parties. So I think things like shortlists and quotas have their place. But I think we also need to all pitch into making politics more accessible and more welcoming for everybody who wants to be involved. Because, I mean, you can't be what you can't see. That's the famous phrase. So, making it more accessible, and welcoming to folk who actually want to get involved will hopefully inspire other people to get in as well. And also, we've got to employ mechanisms until we can get to that point.
What are your thoughts, Emma?
Yeah, and I think this is something that we all have to be involved in. Everyone here has a responsibility to help make politics more diverse and representative. I'm really chuffed to see Olaf and Lloyd here, for example. We definitely need more younger people in elected positions. There's loads of fabulous young activists, but I want to see them being elected so they actually have some involvement in the decision-making process. I very strongly feel that as a disabled person and a woman, it's my job to encourage, but also to support other disabled people and women so that they can stand for election. They feel empowered to do that. Completely agree with you, Lloyd. It's about being seen. So if I see someone like me doing it, I'm much more likely to feel that I can do it. It sort of gives me permission. But it's about being supportive, going out there mentoring, showing people, bringing them in, shadowing. There's loads of ways that we can make it more accessible, but everyone has a responsibility. Everyone in this room and everyone that's involved in politics at any level.
Indeed, and that's the case. And we've been talking about, the people putting themselves forward for the democratic process and becoming councillors. We're talking about getting these other groups in. That's for all parties and none. This isn't a party political issue. This is something we need to do to enhance our democracy. What are your thoughts, Olaf?
Yeah, I 100% agree and echo what Emma and Lloyd said there. I think it's all about empowerment. We need to obviously lead by example and get inspiring, women and BAME candidates and disabled candidates, LGBT people to lead by example and to show that they can be councillors and they can be inspiring. And that involves, going out to schools, into colleges, into youth clubs, into council schemes, and just being active. Obviously, there's a lot of barriers to being active, right? We can't just simply say, just go out and be active, because the fact is, and we have to confront that fact, politics is quite toxic to a lot of people, and especially to minorities. If you look at Twitter, for example, if you look at the culture with which politics is done, that puts a lot of people off. And if you combine that with a lot of the structural issues that men, disabled, that women, disabled people, LGBT people, etc., face, it's difficult. There aren't many incentives to get involved. So what we need to do is, and I know it sounds like platitude, but we need to change the way that we do politics. We need to make politics more collaborative. We need to make it more grassroots, more bottom up, and less adversarial. We need less of the sort of Westminster old boys club culture, which is all about, yaboo politics. And we need a lot more working across party lines, working together, working with community groups and not just political parties. And I just through doing that, inspire people to get involved.
It is true that a lot of people's view of politics is just that theatre that they see in the House of Commons and the PMQs, where they see, things being challenged and what they see as no answers and insults going back and forward. And that's not really the kind of way that it works. The behind the scenes, both as councillors and MPs and MSPs, there's a lot of collaborative cross-party work that goes on to get the right things done, but it's a real kind of shame that doesn't come through. You'll all know about the Scottish Government's Democracy Matters Local Governance Review, which I think is looking to try and tackle some of those things and looking at ways of strengthening communities and local democracy. I think it's not going to come as a big shock to any of you that the survey found that there was a quite an overwhelming desire for much greater control over what happens in the places they know best, their own communities. So I'm interested to hear from all of you your thoughts on how local councils can help facilitate that kind of change going forward. Emma, we'll start with you this time, I think.
I think a really good start would be meaningful participatory budgeting. At the moment, I don't know what it's like in other councils, but we have these sort of Dragon's Den style things where there's a pot of money and local groups do a presentation and the audience decides who gets the funding. And that absolutely does not work. In my experience, is not participatory. If you have the cutest children or the nicest presentation, you get voted. It's not around need. So I think that the community should genuinely be involved in budgeting decisions. They should be given a chance to identify priorities in their local communities. And that should involve businesses, community councils, community trusts, but also the people that don't put themselves forward. So we should go and find people and ask for their input into participatory budgeting so that it's genuinely that, it's participatory. I think that would be a really good start.
And Lloyd?
Yeah, I completely agree with Emma. I mean, we are going into this election with a pledge to ramp up participatory budgeting and community empowerment. I mean, part of why I'm standing is because I know that the current council just doesn't do enough community engagement. And I really, really think that we have the opportunity now to radically transform the way that the council interacts with the community and the say that everyday neighbourhoods have over their own future. And so that's really where I am on that as well. I think it needs to be meaningful, as Emma said, involving more than just local projects. It's got to involve community councils, businesses, community forums, and all that sort of thing.
And Olaf?
Again, Emma and Lloyd are pretty much bang on the money. I think participatory budgeting is really important in terms of giving people, not just a veneer of control, but actual tools to shape their community, actual devolved budgets. And here at Fife Council as well, I've been trying that. I've been in joint administration with Labour. There's been quite a lot of sort of toing and froing, but I think one of our big pledges is more of that participative approach. Apart from that, one of the things I'm really passionate about is community wealth building. And community wealth building is something that we've started doing in Fife. There's been a report that came out a couple of years ago about how we can make sure that communities own more of the assets that are key to our areas, so-called anchor institutions. It's basically about anchor institutions like hospitals, like colleges, like universities, like the council itself, investing in local supply chains, promoting worker-owned cooperatives, making sure that we spend money locally rather than outsource it to elsewhere. It's better for our climate, it's better for our well-being, it costs less, and it involves communities in the process. It's all about democracy from the bottom up. And you've seen that in Preston, in England, you've seen that in Cleveland, in Ohio, North Ayrshire has been doing that pretty well as well. And Fife is hopefully going to be another beacon on the Scottish map of community wealth building and this whole approach, not just about the toolkit, but about the culture of doing politics from the bottom up.
And change can happen through the kind of change you're talking about can happen through local politics and local authorities. Lloyd was talking about the manifesto and these things being in the manifesto. For those that are cynical that are listening about manifestos for councils, I just want to give my own experience. When we were elected into the administration in 2012 in Highland, we had a SNP manifesto which got transported immediately into a 127-point programme for administration. all of those things were either delivered or were put into progress as long-term changes that are being made. So, when people talk about this being in their manifesto and you being able to vote for it, it's true, you can actually do that. It just while I'm on about in my time at the council, it was my experience then that some communities were really, really good at taking ownership of local issues. And that meant, as Emma was talking about the X factor kind of approach, it did mean that some got more funding and kind of greater help. But that, while it was not always the case, those did tend to be more affluent communities. How do we all work together to help build more capacity in our communities, particularly those ones that don't often get the attention that they need? And maybe Lloyd could start on that.
Yeah, sure. And I think part of it is about real engagement in the community, and that comes through community groups like community councils, neighborhood forums, that sort of thing, but also equipping them with the tools, the resources, and the ability to really engage with the council and draw the council's attention to a lot of the big issues locally. Councillors obviously have a huge part to play in that by getting really in there on the grassroots level, speaking to people in neighborhoods, saying, what are your views on this? Maybe running sort of mini surveys to really find out what local communities are thinking, and then feed that back to the council and say, this neighborhood, there's a big issue here. This is what the priority is. I'm going to work with X community group and X forum to really push this at a council level. And by doing that, you're not only ensuring that these issues get solved, but you're also building the confidence in the community that they can actually take these issues to the council and get them dealt with. And that improves, participation in local democracy, but also in politics generally.
And Olaf, what would your thoughts be in terms of, particularly those communities that, kind of struggle to get attention? How do you feel you could deal with that better?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a cost of living crisis. There's been 12 years of austerity that's been brutal on working class communities. It's understandable by design why working class communities get less involved. I mean, if you have to work 2 or 3 jobs on a 0-hour contract, if you have to feed your family, you may not have as much time for politics and for community engagement. And that's just the brutal reality of it. And we have to confront that. So I think opposing austerity, opposing cuts, and making sure that people have enough to live on, that we don't have the indignity and horror of families screaming for food banks. That's a priority. But I think the second priority, and it's equally important, is what Lloyd was saying. I think it's about empowering community councils, TRAs, to be confident and to take their proposals to council. That also means increasing their presence in council meetings. So that could be things like surveys, that could be things like open meetings, that could be like democracy forums. I think councils could be harnessing online a bit more of the digital consultation methods. That's not been done really a lot. And the pandemic has shown that we can do politics differently without necessarily having to be in a place. So there's a lot of things that we can do, but I think making sure that working class communities get involved, you've got to fix the fundamental issues where working class people have been alienated through austerity, through cuts, through demonization. You've got to reverse that.
And I see you nodding your head a lot, Emma. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we could do a lot as councillors and councils to support communities to set up trusts and support local groups with governance and things. Because I think the governance can be a bit of a turn-off for people. So if we provide really good advice, training, guidance and support, that may encourage them to set up their own trusts. That gives them the ability to apply for funding, and money is power. So that enables them to start those projects. But to have the kind of people Olaf and Lloyd were talking about, but also make it fun and engaging. Where I think we're all getting much more familiar with social media, and the councils started using social media much more often as a vibrant Twitter feed. Culturality and Bewley Community Council's Facebook page is brilliant. Make it inclusive and interesting. It's not all about middle-aged men, sorry, Drew, sitting in a room discussing planning. And there's lots of ways. We have a fantastic Christmas lights project going on in my village of Kirkhill, and we have fundraising events. I think people need to realise it's all those kind of things, not just what they might consider to be the boring or the governance type things, if that makes sense. I think the pandemic really helped there, actually, because it brought communities together and showed what power they can have and what they can do to help each other and to look after each other, provide mutual support. So we could keep building on that.
You could indeed. Just while I'm with you on this, Emma, you're out the doors at the moment, as are you all. Are you finding that people are more or less engaged with the local elections than they were with, say, the Westminster election or even the Scottish parliamentary elections?
I'll be honest with you, Drew. There's been a lot of discussion in Westminster, but that's good because I think people are. It feels like they're more engaged in politics, although maybe a bit more tired of politics, if that makes sense. Partygate is still.
Is scunnered the right word?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. The perfect word, a good Scottish word. But Partygate is still on everyone's lips. It's not going away. People are disgusted that those at the top of our government in Westminster were partying. Well, they couldn't be with their loved ones or even hug them at a funeral. And people are really still angry about that. But as I was saying earlier, because of COVID, I think people are more aware of community action and activism, but also they're more aware of what the council can do for them. So it's less about complaining about the roads or what the council can do or isn't doing well. There's much more recognition now that the council supported them through the pandemic, provided food boxes for them, gave them grants to help them survive. So that there is a wee bit more positivity. It's about what the council can do. So yeah, I'm feeling like people are engaging. There's still a wee bit scunnered, but they feel engaged.
Yeah, and is that your experience, Olaf? Are they more engaged in this election, do you think, for some of the reasons that Emma said, or are you finding something different?
I think they're quite engaged. I wasn't quite expecting that because obviously turnout's normally about 40%, if we're lucky, 45%. I don't see that reflected on the doorstep. I see people really aware, really engaged, really passionate. But I think as Emma alluded to there, I think a lot of people are just quite fed up with the sort of collective cluster of Westminster and the mismanagement, not just of the pandemic, despite all of that, talk about the vaccine rollout. It's actually been mostly our wonderful NHS that's been rolling it out, not Boris Johnson, what all he wants to say. And people are quite fed up with the sort of contempt they can treat with, and people are feeding it in the pocket as well. And I think the mixture, because of living crisis and Partygate, is getting people talking about politics, getting them excited to choose something different. Obviously, these are Scottish local elections, so we're trying to always keep it down to local issues and how we as councillors can actually use our powers to make things better. So it could be things like community wealth building. It could be things like improving our schools or investing in our public transport. We cannot remove Boris Johnson out of office as councillors. I wish we could. I wish that we could help with the cost of living crisis in a more meaningful way.
And Lloyd, are you finding that people are scunnered with the Westminster cluster burek, as Olaf put it, and is that motivating them for the local elections, or are you having a different experience?
No, I would completely agree. I think people can see the content that they've been treated with by Westminster, particularly through Partygate and the fact that Rishi Sunak is just not doing enough to actually help people put money in their pockets. So there's that element to it, which is sort of the overarching context in which we're having these local elections. But locally in Angus and here in Monteith and Sidlaw, people are really, really fed up with the Tory Independent Council that's running things. They have been so incompetent. We've had councillors who've been involved in online abuse scandals, running fake accounts to try and dupe voters and also insulting other people. So there's that, but there's also this real sort of hunger for change that I'm sensing among people. People really, really do not like the way that things are being run at the moment. And we locally in the SNP obviously are working really, really hard to convince people that it's the SNP that is the party of positive change here in Angus, and we are. And we're really working hard to turn the hunger for change into votes at the ballot box.
And I feel a lot of that enthusiasm when I'm speaking to different candidates in different parts of Scotland just now. For the SNP are clearly motivated, and I think there are very clear lines about why that would be the case that the public can understand. You know, and we talked about them earlier with the Scottish Child Payment, with the increases to other types of support in the face of what's unfolding at Westminster, as Olaf said. But on that, the subject that Emma brought up a couple of moments ago, Lloyd, how do you think the pandemic has impacted the way that we all connect with the voters in our communities now?
Yeah, I think in many ways it's made it a little bit more challenging. I mean, I know certainly from my experience of campaigning, some folk don't want you out their doors, and that's completely fine because everyone has to sort of evaluate the risks associated with what we are doing, and if they don't want a leaflet through the door, or if they don't want to be canvassed, that's absolutely fine, and you've got to respect that. I think it's put a greater emphasis on online campaigning, which has always been an important aspect of winning an election. But now that folk are working from home and they might be online a bit more, putting a little bit more emphasis into online campaigning can help you reach voters that you maybe wouldn't get through sort of your more regular campaign methods. But I think as we get closer to normality, whatever normality is, the new normal as everyone calls it, even though I hate that phrase, I think we can return to more sort of face-to-face normal campaigning, and sort of, over the summer maybe, or as we get closer to polling day, we can actually get back and do a lot of the things that we've really loved doing. So yeah.
And Olaf, which policy areas of the council do you think are most important to local people? I think you've touched a lot about the cost of living, or talked a lot about the cost of living there. In terms of council policy areas, which areas do you think are most important?
Well, I think you won't find it surprising that I'll say potholes. I'm not sure if potholes are a policy area as such, but definitely roads and improving public transport. A lot of people are very happy about the free bus travel for under 22s, for example, but we need to make sure that we actually have bus services that reach some of the more remote communities that we have here. So that's definitely a big one. Housing.
It's really frustrating. Just before you go into the housing thing, it's really frustrating for people in communities when, for example, they might be able to get the one bus in the morning, but there's nothing that can get them home after their work, and that's something that I think is quite common. There's been, since the Westminster deregulated buses across the UK many years ago, there's been a systemic problem there, and it's something that has to have a new solution. But you were going to talk about housing there, weren't you?
And it's actually just going back to buses for a wee bit. It's actually really exciting that the Scottish government has devolved a lot of the powers to local government.
Yeah, and people don't understand that's power that the councils have had recently from the Scottish government.
Aye, that's right. So recently the Scottish government has devolved powers to set up essentially bus companies that can be run by the local authority, essentially not for profit, and take it out the hands of big operators that are often profit motivated, and make it more about community-owned transport. And I think that's actually really exciting, because you have lots of people, especially young folk, especially working-class folk, that don't have access to a car. After the pandemic, they've been, maybe asked to go back to the office, etc., and they're missing out on these opportunities because there's just not enough buses going around. So that's hopefully in the frame again of community wealth building. If we can take back the bus companies and maybe create something a bit like with ScotRail, which was nationalised just today, that'd be very exciting. But in terms of housing, we have a huge amount of council houses in Burnt Island, actually one of the highest in the country in terms of proportion. A lot of these houses just need improved, especially when it comes to disability access. That's something that the council's been investing in quite heavily to make sure that their homes are accessible to all. We've also been buying back a lot of homes to make sure that we get them on stream quicker. The one big policy disagreement between Labour and us here in Fife is that Labour don't want to buy back council homes. They want to build new ones, but obviously that takes a lot longer. We advocate more of a pragmatic approach, that where we need to tackle overcrowding, we just buy them back and give it to the families that need it quicker, and we still build lots of energy efficient new houses. So I think these two issues are the big ones, but apart from that, just cost of living as well, and making sure that people are helped with the rising energy costs, more energy efficiency, greener energy, etc.
Is that the same for you, Emma?
Yeah, roads and public transport, roads. But we're really keen as an SNP group to set up a pan in my community transport service. That that's a particular issue, as you know, in the Highlands too. We're desperate to stop the monopoly of the private bus companies. They had us over a barrel with the school bus contracts. But of course, the Scottish Government funded free bus travel will help with that considerably. My son just got his free bus pass. He's delighted. We're delighted because we're no longer his taxi service. But we've put loads of money into roads in Ireland. And the budget that the SNP just negotiated in partnership with the administration has secured 10 million last year, another 10 million this year, with £5 million recurring to spend on roads, so we can really bring them up to the standard they should be.
Yeah, just before you go on, Emma, that's quite an exceptional thing that's been happening in Highland, where even in opposition, because we're not in administration, the SNP group has actually worked proactively and positively to identify things that they could bring forward to help people in the Highlands, and actually use their wit and guile to manage to persuade the administration to adopt them. And it's a matter of record. This isn't just, oh, we did this, folk are going, aye, right. But this is a matter of record that the SNP group have managed to do that. So it just shows you the powers that councillors can have, even if they're not in administration, but obviously better if you are, because then you can get more done.
It was a really successful process. And actually, you talked about manifestos. We're developing our Highland SNP manifesto based on that. And now we have evidence that everything we're going to promise is deliverable, because it's costed, because we were involved in the process.
Okay, just before I move on, I want to talk about, your pitch in a wee minute. But Lloyd, on that subject of what's important to the voters in your award, what would you say are the main issues?
Well, roads is a biggie. In Angus in 2019-20, only 5.7 miles of road were resurfaced locally. And the Courier ran a big article about it, saying that some voters might need to wait over 100 years to get some of their roads resurfaced at the current pace of improvement that is going on, which is just not good enough. I think housing is a really big one as well. We in Monteith, in my area, we're currently undergoing, there's a lot of new development of housing going on there. Obviously, some of that is affordable housing thanks to the policies of the Scottish Government, which is amazing. But it's also about maximising energy efficiency as well, because we know as we try to tackle the climate crisis that having energy efficient, warm homes is going to be really, really important. Bus service is also incredibly important. Some of the bus infrastructure in there's sort of rural parts of Sidlaw, like in Strathmartin, is just atrocious, and the council's not done enough to look after that. So that's something else, and I'm also really excited about the opportunities given to local councils through the devolution of more power over buses. So.
And it's true, just before we move on, it's true that people are always looking for more investment in roads, and looking for more money to come into that, and that's really important, as is active travel, and of course those roads, particularly in rural communities, are really important for the future of zero carbon transport, because as we get rid of petrol and diesel engines starting in 2030, when they're being phased out, we're going to have to use zero carbon ways of actually getting out, or low emission and no emission ways of getting about, I should say, with that. So that's all coming up. But the criticism about, the Scottish Government should give councils more money often comes from political opponents, doesn't it? And I find this particularly interesting, because I know that Scottish Government's done, with its fixed budget, done an awful lot to try and support local government and free up funding for them. And I've got to reflect, having taken part as the only the kind of SNP member, because it was largely an English issue, in fact it wasn't entirely an English issue, on local government funding in England. We were hearing MP after MP, even from the Tories, saying that their councils were facing cuts of 45% and more, and MPs saying that their councils wanted to hand back the keys to the Westminster government because they just couldn't run things anymore. So there is a need for more money to go into local government, but you can only do that if you control the resources and have the levers that allow you to do that, which is something obviously we aspire to do that. Let's talk about the voters in your ward, and if all the voters in your wards were online just now in this Zoom call just now, what would your pitch be to them on how important it is to vote in this election, Olaf?
Well, if all of them here, then the server will probably crash because we have 10,000 voters in my ward. Look, I think it's really important that you use your power. I know it sounds like a cliche, but this is the one time when you can shape the direction of the council. All it takes is just put cross in a, sorry, not a cross, a 1, 2, 3 in a ballot, in a box, in a ballot paper. And it's really important that you don't let apathy win. A lot of the time, the Tories are actually counting on young people, working class people, and others not turning out because that's the way to keep business as usual. If people are not engaged in politics, it's easier to pursue cuts and damaging agendas like that and get away with things like Partygate and so on. So I think it's really important that you just get out and vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for, but use that power, speak to your councillors, study the manifestos, and then democracy doesn't end on the 5th of May. It actually starts there. Engage with your councillors, speak to them, engage in your community council. All of that is really important because if we truly want a collaborative sort of bottom-up politics, we have to build it ourselves. We have to build it together.
Okay, and Lloyd?
Yeah, it's time for a change, really. And we have a really exciting opportunity on the 5th of May to build for the future. But we've got to really think about the kind of future that we want. Do we want it to be a future of community empowerment, of tackling climate change, tackling poverty, providing for the people who live here? And you don't get that by staying at home. You get that by getting to the ballot box, however you do it, whether it's by post, by proxy, or in person. And you get that by voting SNP 1, 2, or 3 in some wards.
And Emma, what would your pitch be to the voters about why it's important to vote in this election?
I would just stress to everyone that politics isn't a dirty word. Life is politics. Politics is everything we do. Politics is the roads we travel on, the school our children go to, housing, tourism, bin. Politics is about community and mutual support, involvement and empowerment. It's about pulling together to help each other out, as we did during the pandemic. Looking out for your neighbour who might be deciding whether she can eat today or heat her home. So I would say now more than ever, it's important to make your voice heard. And you do that by voting. So I would say no matter how you vote, just vote. It's really crucial to vote.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our chat today, unfortunately, because I feel that we could go on all day because this is such a meaty subject that we could spend a lot of time on that. But Emma just mentioned there about, the choice between heating or eating for people. Well, of course, we've seen recently with the cost of living increases and particularly the energy price hike that for many people, and especially those who live off the gas grid, who are people who rely on maybe liquid petroleum gas or oil or, wood and use a lot more electricity. This is going to be a crushing time in terms of the cost of living. And they won't have that choice between heating and eating because they won't be able to put the heating on. Just a fact of life. So you'll all be acutely aware of people struggling just now and simply not knowing which way to turn. Local councils all make decisions that directly impact everyday life. How do you think councils can best help your constituents to get through these difficult times, Emma?
Well, yeah, actually, people are really genuinely scared. I've got more calls and emails now than I've had pretty much in my whole term for people that are just scared they're not going to be able to get through the week because they don't have enough money, they don't have enough fuel to keep their houses warm. So, the Highland Council has a number of ways we can help. Well, I put them in touch with crisis and community grants. That the website's a really good place to look as a first step, and I can take them through that. And we provide advice about what people are entitled to make sure they are getting all the grants, all the benefits, all the loans that they're entitled to. And we have a support team, a welfare support team that will take them through their budgeting, give them advice. All the advice that we provide is obviously confidential. Lloyd mentioned energy efficiency. That's a big area that I think we can help with, especially now that we've got this fabulous budget through. We can upgrade heating in people's council houses to make sure they are using the most efficient and affordable heating that we can provide. There is help out
Yeah.
there, but it's getting pretty desperate.
Emma's just mentioned one of the opportunities, Lloyd. What more do you see that your council can do better to help people navigate the cost of living crisis?
Well, yeah, I agree with Emma in terms of signposting. I think we can make use of the resources of the council to really point people in the direction of the support that they can get. I think energy efficiency, as Emma said, is a huge part of it, to be able to cut costs and also improve the standard of heating in people's homes. But I think councils also do have a responsibility to take the cost of living into account when they're thinking about rises to council tax and other rates. It's a really, really tough time just now, and councils have a responsibility to really think about the welfare of everybody who lives in the area before making changes to things like council tax and rates. So really thinking about that, but also engaging constructively with the Scottish Government to see what more is available. And I think if all the councils could get together with the Scottish Government to call with them for more power and more money, I think that would be a really, really powerful signal to Rishi Sunak and the Treasury that he should not ignore.
And Olaf, what are your views on what the council can do and do better?
I couldn't agree more with what Lloyd just said there in terms of getting more powers to councils. I think signposting is really important as well. I think people need to know that there's lots of community groups that are out there to help. You just have to put people in the right direction and give them access to the hardship funds, to grants, and so on. Obviously, we've got lots of food banks, especially here in Fife. You need to make sure that they're supported properly. It is a tragedy that we have to rely on food banks and that we've come to this point. But in the short term, this is where we're at. This is people who are forced into food banks and then worrying about whether they can actually cook the food that they get from food banks because energy prices have skyrocketed so much. I think in the longer term, definitely the focus on clean energy, retrofitting, and efficiency. We've been installing lots of solar panels here in sunny Fife, but also making sure that we've got community wind farms. These are popping up all over the kingdom, so that's really encouraging to see. We could set up a Fife-owned solar company as well. That's something that's being explored. And of course, insulating council homes, especially, these are the people that are often facing the highest bills. They're on prepayment meters. They're struggling the most. I think the absolute priority has to be insulate,
And
that next winter is much.
And despite limited powers, and as I said, not having all the levers in the budget, Scotland's been doing about 4 times as much insulating, per head of population than we've seen in England, and ahead of Wales and Northern Ireland as well over the past few years. But there does need to be more of that happening. How do you feel about the fact that this is particularly more striking in the Highlands, where we produce something like 327% of the energy that we need here, and we export a lot of it out. People are going to be struggling with the energy crisis, and we find here that in the Highlands, people are paying more than 50% more for electricity per unit than people living in London. That's beyond scandalous. And when you factor in the differences in the standing charge and the costs for even for generating power and connecting to the grid are much higher in Scotland by a factor of pounds against subsidies in the south of England. How do you think that local authorities can help with raising that inequity and challenging that and getting something done on a UK wide scale as well? Do you think there's a role for councils in campaigning in that way, Lloyd?
Yeah, I would say so. I think first, it's really important to dwell on the point that you've made, that is an absolutely shocking example of the way that the UK is set up, just not working for people in Scotland. It's absolutely atrocious that people have to pay so much more when they are generating more electricity than they actually need. I think in terms of getting something done on a UK-wide scale, I think councils can work together in Scotland, but also with other local authorities across the UK to really highlight this as an issue. But also, bringing in the sort of big guns, so to speak, of the Scottish Government as well, because the Scottish Government and councils together and a lot of cross-community groups as one loud, powerful voice, uniting with other authorities and organisations across the UK. That's a big, big deal. And I think councils have that. Other actions that councils can take locally in terms of energy efficiency, as we've already said, is insulating homes and really trying to retrofit and explore new ways of generating cheaper electricity for particularly rural communities. So I think there's a huge amount of work to be done there.
And as I said earlier, Emma and I share a good number of constituents across my constituency in our ward. Do you find that that's something that people are becoming more aware of and more annoyed about, the fact they can see in their own backyards this electricity being generated, and yet they're paying more than elsewhere, particularly in London and in the southeast, for the electricity they're getting?
Yeah, people are, again, they're angry about that. They don't understand it. I don't think they're given a proper explanation. Perhaps because there isn't one. It's a daylight robbery, and that's how they see it. But beyond the messaging, and the councils can really do some innovative and creative things to generate their own electricity locally. You might be aware, due to this part of the budget negotiations, we're now going to invest in hydrogen, green hydrogen production across the whole of the Highlands. So we already part there, but we can pretty much be self-sufficient in energy production. And so we've got a double role. We've got the messaging and the campaigning, but we can do stuff locally to make to do it ourselves and make ourselves self-sufficient.
And as an example of that, as a totemic example of that, you've got the new Ness Hydro, which looks like an armadillo, sitting next to the River Ness just now, as an example of local authorities being able to do that. Olaf, I want to give you a word or two on this subject as well, because again, you've got a lot of renewable energy being generated nearby, and yet you've got this massive cost inequity, and nobody can give a clear answer of why your constituents and why my constituents are being treated so much more badly than elsewhere in the UK, particularly in the south.
Look, that's us going back to the cluster Burras scheme, and this really is one of the worst examples of that. Scotland has 25% of Europe's entire wind energy potential. It's got 25% of Europe's entire tidal potential, right? Huge amounts of energy that we can generate, the abundance that we're blessed with, even solar as well. And it's great. It's great that we've got more wind farms, more solar farms, etc. But connecting to the grid is so prohibitively expensive that at the moment, this mismanagement coming from Westminster is hampering producers and families and communities that want to generate clean energy. Look, Scotland is being charged £7.36, I think, or £7, round about that, £7.36.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Connect to the grid. Norway is being charged about £1.20. They're actually more remote geographically than Scotland, if you look at the whole of Norway. Countries like Poland and Luxembourg, Germany, and so on are charged nothing, are charged zero.
Yeah, zero. Yeah.
So the injustice of the transmission charge is something that has to be tackled. Again, it's easy for a council candidate to speak about that from the sidelines, but it's important that we unite together with MPs, with MSPs, with civil society, with the industry, to really call for those powers to be urgently devolved to Scotland, because at the moment it is a daylight robbery, as Alan said. Scotland can be exporting so much green energy, we can be booming economically from it, but we're just being hampered by yet more Westminster mismanagement.
And it's a cracking point, because I often have to remind my constituents that, like me, the Scottish government and local councils are dealing with working with policies that we're being having imposed on us by Westminster. And much of the local budgets, we've been talking about how do we support people in this cost of living crisis. Much of the local budgets are also used to mitigate the impacts of the draconian Westminster policies. And we only have to look at, again, what a big kind of ticket item where the Scottish government's having to pay to mitigate the bedroom tax every year, which is still out there. These are things that have to be done at every level of government in Scotland, and yet they're not choices that are being made by the Scottish people. Why do you believe, Lloyd, this would change with independence?
Well, first of all, it would stop us getting Tory governments that we don't vote for and haven't voted for in nearly 70 years, which for me is a fundamental point, in that the government will be led by the people who live here. And I don't say that from any sort of narrow nationalist point of view. I say that in terms of the people who best know the priorities of our communities, of our towns, our cities, our little villages across the country, are the people who live there. and the people who live here in Scotland. And I think taking the democratic route, having all of these choices made in Scotland by the people of Scotland is the best way to make use of all the resources and the talent that we have as a country. And we can really deliver some positive change, but also some really transformational change in a lot of communities across the country. And that's what independence brings.
And it's true to say, Olaf, that, you know, independence doesn't cure all the problems, and it doesn't mean that no government in an independent Scotland would ever make any mistakes or have any issues there. But it does mean that you don't have these things imposed on you. Is that something you can see that, you know, would definitely be a tangible thing for voters if they voted for independence in the forthcoming referendum?
I think a lot of people just don't realise the cost of Tory governments that were actually based there. There was often the talk of a union dividend. Do you remember in 2014 they promised us something at 1,200?
There was a whole, I think there was a whole list of things that were promised in 2014.
We promised lower food prices, lower energy prices, all of that. And today, you know, families are being hit with enormous cost of living crisis, which obviously is not solely caused by the Tories. That is not entirely true to suggest, but it's been exacerbated by the Tories. And if you look at how other countries, independent countries, have managed the cost of living crisis, you've had Bulgaria freezing its energy and electricity prices. You've had France capping at 4% versus 54% in the UK. You've had countries like Germany and Belgium giving one-off payments much more generous than Rishi Sunak's Wonga-style £200 loan. So I think it's really important that we see the possibilities of independence. As you mentioned there, Drew, we're spending £600 million mitigating the bedroom tax, which not a single Scot has voted for, and yet we're paying £600 million from a squeak budget. That's, if you count it, the head of population in Scotland, that's about £110 per person. So I think it's about being honest, and it's about making sure that we don't just offer a rosy view that everything will be better overnight with independence. That's dishonest. I think we have to confront a lot of the challenges that we face. We have to speak more about issues like currency and borders and so on. But ultimately, it's about transformative change, and it's about putting the powers in the hands of the Scottish people so that we don't have to mitigate Westminster government or suffer from Boris Johnson and their contemptuous government, so that we can build a better Scotland together.
And it's that mitigation you were talking about that's part of the problem, because they're constantly having to do these things to make effect to policies. And you were saying quite rightly that not all of the problems that are occurring in the cost of living crisis just now are, you know, are the fault of the Westminster government. A lot of them are. And, you know, as regular listeners will know to this podcast, I cover international trade, and you only have to look at the horrendous impacts of Brexit on, for example, the cost of goods in the shops. You know, speaking to one distributor yesterday, saying that the increased costs coming in of paperwork and so forth have put a product that he sells for about £7 or £8 up by £1.20. You know, and these are just purely down to the Brexit costs of import on that. So there are lots of things there that are caused that we're having to mitigate at the moment. Emma, do you feel that we could change things for the positive with by not having these things imposed on us, but by making our own choices, sometimes making our own mistakes, but obviously doing the things that, you know, people here voted for?
Yeah, well, you mentioned some things are not the fault of Westminster, but one thing that's very clearly the fault of Westminster, exacerbated by Brexit, is the hostile environment. And in the Highlands, we have a lovely, warm, welcoming environment. We'd be a better place to attract people to come and live and work here in the Highlands. That would boost the local economy, enabling us to reach our potential. There's so many opportunities here. Tourism, green energy, biotechnology, health sciences. But we need people to come and work here to support those industries. It's a welcome environment, not a hostile environment we need.
Well, I'm going to give you this question then, because I'm going to ask you all this question. I would come to you one after another with the same question. And I think this should be quite an easy one from you, given what you've just said. But if you could implement one change of our UK policy at the moment, and change a current policy we have but can't at the moment, through being in an independent Scotland, what would it be?
I'm going to cheat and give you two. Because I mentioned immigration, that's obviously a big one. I would change immigration policy and make it much easier for people to come here. But I'd also change the benefits, bring all benefits. All benefits should be in our control. so that we can apply the Scottish social security approach, which we've now started rolling out very successfully, proceeding on the assumption that you're entitled to support. And it's our responsibility to find you and ensure you get the benefit that you're entitled to, not demonizing people on benefits and making them go through hoops to get what they need. The system should be about dignity and fairness. So that would be definitely bring benefits into our control.
Thank you. And Olaf, your one policy or change from the current situation to that's one that you could do in an independent Scotland?
Gosh, by the way, I couldn't agree more with Emma in terms of social security and immigration. As someone who's Polish and EU citizen, I'm really passionate about that. I could talk about it hours. But I think, not to repeat Emma's great points, I would say probably implement a windfall tax on companies that have made enormous profits during the pandemic. We often have Labour calling for us to do that. We don't have the powers to do that in the Scottish Parliament. It's often the irony that Labour is often calling for things that we cannot implement, but aren't calling for the powers to be devolved to Hollywood. I think with independence, we could galvanise the powers of a normal independent country and impose a windfall tax, a one-off windfall tax on companies like Amazon, like ASOS, that have made tens of billions of profit in the pandemic to ease that burden on working families and just more redistributive economy in general within that framework.
Okay, and Lloyd?
Well, those are fantastic ones, and every time Emma and Olaf started to speak, I thought, oh, there's another one off my list. So I'm going to say Brexit, and not just for the trade and the economy side of things, but also because it would be fantastic to reconnect Scotland to the world's biggest single market and seize all the amazing opportunities that come with EU membership. But also, workers' rights are being eroded by this UK government.
Absolutely.
And we've seen the result of that through the recent P&O scandal. And so for me, a part of building, as Olaf was saying, a redistributive, fairer economy is ensuring that workers have a stronger set of rights than they do right now. And that is a big opportunity that we have as an independent country to build an economy that works for everybody, especially people who work in it.
Okay, and finally, one last question for you all. If you just pipe in with your own thoughts on this. A lot of independent supporters might be worried about getting out in the doors and helping campaigning because they feel they won't be able to answer questions or whatever. What would your advice be? What would you say to them?
I think it's really important to just highlight that independence is normal. It's not something that's outlandish and nationalistic or Breitbart-like. It's literally just wanting to be a normal country, setting its own future. It's like Denmark or Ireland or Finland. I think over 50 countries have left the UK, obviously many in different circumstances. To the backdrop of slavery and colonialism, Scotland is not a colony, but Scotland is a nation. And Scotland deserves to have its future set by the people who live here. It doesn't just mean people who are born in Scotland, born and bred in Scotland. I was born and bred in Scotland, but I'm still Scottish and I still have a stake in society. And I think it's really important to empower people to imagine that better future and just say, independence works. Independent countries don't try to go back to the old empires. And I think that's the future.
Is that very much your pitch to folk that are still undecided on independence too?
Yeah, I would say so. The whole normality of it, but also saying it's common sense, because why should Scotland have to be governed by a government that we don't vote for, imposing decisions on us that we don't like, that are against the popular will, like Brexit? But it's also about, as Olaf was saying, pointing to the examples of small independent countries who are happier, healthier, and wealthier than we are right now, because they've got the powers to make the changes that we want to make. That's the real pitch I would make, but also painting it as an opportunity for transformative change at a local level and a national level.
Any final points, Emma, on that?
Yeah, I would just say I think everyone in this virtual room knows that Scotland will be more progressive, welcoming, inclusive, prosperous, and when we gain independence. But what that's going to look like is up to the people of Scotland. So I would say, whatever your party politics, even if you don't support a political party, independence is about making the decisions about Scotland in Scotland, not in London.
Well, I can't think of a better comment to end on. So Emma Knox, Lloyd Melville and Olaf Stando, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Scotland's Choice.
Thank you. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.